This morning and go to Daniel chapter 6. Daniel chapter 6. I've enjoyed God's singing today and hearing you all as a congregation sing as well. Daniel chapter 6, as we continue talking about the power of prayer. The power of prayer aids our decisions in crucial situations, we said last week. Elijah was in a crucial situation indeed, but he made a decision based on God's leadership, and God was faithful, and God is faithful, and God will be faithful. Now, number two, the power of prayer assures our deliverance in critical settings. And you talk about some critical settings, we're going to look at them, and we begin with verse 10 of Daniel chapter 6. Now, when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into his house, and his windows being open in his chamber toward Jerusalem, he kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day and prayed. Everybody say that. Prayed. He prayed. And in conjunction with his praying, he gave thanks before his God as he did aforetime. Then these men assembled. I hope that you're enough of a Bible student that you know what's going on here through these chapters in Daniel. If you do, that's fine. You'll rehearse it with me in just a minute. If you're not familiar with it, it's one of the most dramatic stories in all the Bible. And especially Daniel and his prophecies being in conjunction with the book of the Revelation. And you Bible studiers would be very familiar with that. Then these men assembled and found Daniel, everybody say it, praying. Praying. And making supplication before his God. The procedure of prayer that the Bible is referring to here, Daniel and his friends had been taken into captivity from Jerusalem, and they were all those many miles away in Babylon. And Babylon means confusion. And God is not the author of confusion, 1 Corinthians chapter 14 says. But God is still God. And so there they were in a foreign land, and now at this particular moment, he was, by the law of the Medes and Persians, forbidden to pray. But he kept his windows open, and he would face Jerusalem at 9 a.m., 12 noon, and 3 p.m., 3 times a day, the moments of prayer. And he prayed and gave thanks to God. His enemies didn't like it. They were against it. Not necessarily against his praying, but get this, against him personally. The life of a child of God is in dire, direct contradiction to the life of those in sin. And those who are of their father the devil, as Jesus said, lost in darkness, still in need of a rebirth. They're not going to like me. They're going to try to get rid of the prayer. They're going to try to get rid of expressions of Christ. They're going to try to do all these things. And again this morning from Ecclesiastes 1, there's nothing new under heaven. It's been aforetime. So all of these things that are happening today, they've happened before. Now, we're a generation who we believe that Christ is coming in our lifetime. And I don't mind that. I agree with you. I'm on board with you. I'd be tickled to death if the Lord were to come today. But being quite frankly honest, my old Uncle Charlie Johnson, that was a preacher for years and years and years, he thought sincerely that Christ was coming in his lifetime. Uncle Charlie died. Bryce Martin gave everything he had away because he fully was persuaded. He's an old red-headed preacher that many of us knew and loved. he honestly thought Jesus was coming in his lifetime. I held his funeral years ago. So do I know for sure that Jesus is coming in my lifetime? No. But I definitely know for sure that I'm going. It's appointed unto everyone once to die, and after this the judgment. And on our sojourn in this earth, even as God's people, from regeneration and justification all the way to glorification and into eternity, this little X number of years that I have down here, they're nothing in comparison to eternity. So why totally focus on these short years and totally forget eternity? Eternity must be our focal point. We've got to remember that we're living forever, and if we're saved, we're going to go to heaven. And prior to our entry into heaven, our deeds and the things we've done as Christian people, they're all going to be judged by God that day. After this, the judgment. Every Christian will stand at the judgment seat of Christ. Every sinner will be at the great white throne judgment and to receive the degrees of punishment in that awful place beyond time. And those that are saved, whether we've been faithful, whether we've been just, whether we've been honorable, whether we've had integrity, and whether we've tried to live our lives in the light of eternity by the grace of God for the glory of God. Don't forget that. And yet so many times we get so wrapped up in these earthly things. And in so doing, we displace from our mind heavenly things. And yea, even the grace of God and the goodness of God. We forget about Jesus. When some insulter or some injurer or some hypocrite or somebody in the world gets my attention to the point that my emotions are so stirred, that's all I can think about, then my mind has been stripped from me as far as the spiritual mind, and there's been a resurgence of the carnal mind, and my carnal mind does not want nothing to do with Jesus, only wants to embrace the peoples and the events and the happenings of this life. And so I become maybe unconscious to the fact, or subconscious to it, but I'm a carnal Christian. I say I love the Lord. I say I know Jesus. I say all these things just like Israel did, but with my life I deny even knowing Him. I don't extend others grace. I don't have mercy. I don't have peace. It's just agitation and aggravation constantly because I have forgotten all about Jesus. But when I'm spiritually minded, He's the Lord of my life. He's the best friend I have. So when troubles come, I give them to Him automatically and instantaneously. When I'm confronted with something or I'm ambushed by the devil, if I'm friends with Jesus and I love Him and I'm filled with the Spirit, He's the first one I go to. He's the first one I talk to. He's the first one that I want to go to in prayer and supplicate. And with prayer and supplication then comes praise to Him. And He inhabits the praises of His people. And whether anybody else is with me or not, I've got Him and He constitutes my victory. I can get in my vehicle and just ride down the road and I run to the rock that's higher than I am. Shut all this other stuff out. Put it out of your mind. You have to deal with it at times, but deal with it the best you can under the strength of the Holy Spirit. And don't be overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good. And all of that is entailed in the power of prayer. Now, all of these critical settings here. Turn back just real quick, and we'll come back here before we get done, I hope. But Daniel chapter 1, all the way back to Daniel chapter 1. And here are these 4 young men. And don't ever forget this. These 4 young Hebrew men were roughly, best estimates, somewhere around 16 years old. Can you believe that? So don't you dare criticize the young people. Because I've said this for countless times down through the years. Where in the world? It was 20-year-olds and down that led them across Jordan into Canaan. Joseph was just young when he did what he did down in Egypt. So young people, you're not left out. But then we get to the concept that we're living forever, so really these bodies are the only thing getting old. Your spirit and your mind is eternally youthful. And so your spiritual mind and your spiritual strength shouldn't wane and get weaker. It ought to stir up and get stronger as we go through this old life. Now, verse 4 and verse 5, is it? Or verse 6? Children in whom was no blemish, but well-favored, skillful in all wisdom. Look at these. Look at these fellas. Cunning in knowledge, understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace. Now, down in verse 6, let's jump down there. Now, among these were of the children of Judah. And let's look at these boys, 4 of them. Daniel. There it has for you. You might want to take a snapshot of that or get that, because in the Hebrew, the name Daniel means God's prince. But Nebuchadnezzar and Melzar, the chief of his eunuchs, changed Daniel's name to Belteshazzar, a variation of Nebuchadnezzar's grandson that'll come to the throne a little bit later, Belshazzar. So he changed his name from, in the Hebrew, God's prince, to, in the Babylonian tongue, Persian tongue, Baal's prince. Baal is a false god of the Babylonians. And then you had Hananiah, means the Lord's mercy or the mercy of Yahweh, an old variation of John. That's interesting, isn't it? And the Babylonians changed Hananiah's name to Shadrach. That's the command of Aku. That's the Babylonian moon god. Looked at Mishael, whose name, I love Mishael's name. Look at that. Who is what God is. Now that's powerful stuff, ain't it? Mishael, who is what God is. If you're saved by God's grace and the Holy Spirit's living in your heart, you are everything. God is God in your life. So why in the world we got our heads down to whining? Why in the world just because I turned 65 years old and getting white-headed, why in the world I have to duck my head and say, oh, woe is me? How in the world have the Testaments gone through what they've gone through all these years? It's the power of God in them. Go in their home.